Arrival in Harmony Gulch. The iron horse sighed its last, a serpent's hiss of escaping steam marking its surrender as the train lurched to a stop. Harmony Gulch? The name mocked Eliza from the glass, a bitter jest. What solace could she find in Harmony's promise? Dust motes pirouette in the meager sunlight, highlighting the hollowness inside. She'd envisioned this arrival countless times, scenarios veering between triumphant welcome and crushing rebuff. The reality was a stark, neutral ache, a leaden weight of anticipation in her chest. Drawing a breath thick with coal and trepidation, she hefted her few possessions, a worn valise holding her handful of dresses, a well-loved Bible, and the small silver locket, her only tangible link to yesterday. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, seeking anonymity, and smoothed the plain lines of her brown dress. Meager armor, but hers alone. The carriage emptied, leaving her alone in the resonating silence. She forced movement, each boot fall on the iron steps a beat in the countdown to destiny. A cluster of men lounged against the depot's time-worn facade, their gazes pinning her with a scrutiny she'd come to expect. Their eyes, squinting against the sun, felt like calipers measuring her flaws. She descended to the parched ground, the impact reverberating through her. The air was heavier than she'd anticipated, thick and arid. The scent of sage mingled with something feral, untamed. Eyes downcast, she felt the frantic drum of her heart. What did they see? A woman marked by adversity, her bandaged hands broadcasting misfortune. A nervous cough escaped as she surveyed the sparse assembly. Which was him? Which face belonged to Jebediah Stone, the man who had chosen her, unknown and unseen, for his bride? A low murmur stirred the air. She risked a glance upward. He stood separate, a solitary figure hewn from rough stone. Tall and broad, clad in a faded denim shirt and weathered leather chaps that whispered of hard labor and endless horizons. His face, shadowed by his hat, was a study of sharp angles and sun-baked skin. Eyes the color of a storm-bruised sky bore into her, stealing her breath. No smile. No welcoming gesture. Just observation. The silence thickened, oppressive. A blush bloomed on her neck, staining her cheeks. Self-consciousness, a constant shadow, tightened its grip. She wished to dissolve, to become one with the dust beneath her feet. He moved then, each stride measured and unhurried. The crisp chime of his spurs on the wood was the only sound in the pregnant air. He halted before her, his shadow a looming presence. Close up, he was even more imposing, his presence overwhelming. She tilted her head, meeting his unreadable gaze. Eliza May Harding? The voice was a low growl, like distant thunder, neither unkind nor warm. Simply stolid. She swallowed, throat parched. Yes, she breathed, the sound thin and reedy. Her grip on the valise tightened until her knuckles shone white. He nodded once, a terse acknowledgement. I'm Jebediah Stone. He paused, as though searching for words that eluded him. Instead, he simply reached for the valise, his fingers brushing the edge of her bandages. A brief spark of awareness shooting through her. The touch was fleeting, incidental, yet it echoed. It was the first touch that had not been laced with pity or revulsion, merely a practical act. She flinched, pulling back slightly, but he gave no sign of noticing. He turned, striding towards a buckboard hitched to a pair of sturdy horses. Doubt flickered. Was this it? No greeting, no solace, no hint of anything? The men on the porch still watched, their expressions painted with curiosity and something akin to sorrow. She straightened her spine, refusing to offer them the satisfaction of her defeat. She would not be pitied. Drawing another deep breath, she followed. Each step was defiance, a declaration that she was more than her scars, more than her history. She was Eliza May Harding, and she would persevere, or attempt to. As she walked, a subtle shift occurred. The air, moments before stifling, now carried a different note, a whisper of hope perhaps, or simply the scent of wild roses thriving along the parched roadside. The buckboard was aged and worn, the wooden planks sculpted smooth by time. He tossed her valise into the back, then turned, his expression still an enigma. He gestured to the wagon seat. Get in. Not an invitation, an order. And she, Eliza May Harding, was finished with running. Chin lifted, she climbed into the wagon. The seat was unyielding, but she offered no complaint. She would give him, or any of them, no reason to see her as weak. He settled beside her, the wagon tilting with his weight. No words, no assistance offered. He simply took up the reins and clicked his tongue softly. The horses responded, muscles rippling as they leaned into their task. The wagon jolted, throwing her against him. Instinctively, she reached to steady herself, her bandaged hand grazing his arm. He didn't react, didn't recoil, didn't even acknowledge the contact. His gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead, his jaw a rigid line. The wagon rattled and swayed, carrying them away from the station into the expansive landscape. Harmony Gulch dwindled behind, the curious faces fading into the distance. Eliza gazed at the passing scenery, the rolling hills dotted with sage and stunted pine. The air was fresher here, the silence punctuated only by the creak of the wagon and the steady drum of the horses' hooves. As they rode, the sense of embarking on a journey intensified, not just to a new place, but toward a new existence, one that might promise a harmony, or simply more dust and disillusionment. Only time would reveal the truth. Unspoken anxieties. The ghost of Woodsmoke haunted Eliza's garments, a spectral reminder of the blaze that had devoured her Philadelphia life. She chafed her hands, the scarred skin snagging on the homespun shawl. Once, those hands had conjured dreams from lace and silk, crafting gowns that whispered of elegance. Now they charted a course of sorrow, each imperfection a testament to what she'd lost. She yearned for the sewing machine's steady hum, the clean slice of shears, the caress of fine linen. That world seemed a fanciful memory, impossibly remote. From the main room's threshold, she observed Jebediah navigating the kitchen with a practiced efficiency. Not graceful but purposeful, his calloused hands surprisingly nimble as he prepared their meager supper. The savory fragrance of frying bacon began to permeate the small cabin, a fleeting solace in the face of profound uncertainty. He hadn't uttered a syllable since ushering her inside, his reticence a palpable weight adding to the already strained atmosphere. Eliza craved conversation, some clue as to his opinion of her, of their situation. She bit back her words, unsure of how to breach the gulf of unspoken expectations that yawned between them. Her aunt's warnings about Western men echoed in her mind, their rough facades concealing guarded hearts. Did Jebediah fit that mold? Or was he simply indifferent to her presence? He set 2 tin plates on the scarred table, each heaped with fried potatoes, onions, and thick slabs of bacon, and gestured for her to take a seat. The table, a testament to time's passage, bore the deep etchings of countless meals. Eliza perched on the edge of the bench, spine erect, hands knotted in her lap. Jebediah mirrored her position across the table, his gaze riveted to his plate. The silence lengthened, broken only by the scrape of utensils and the fire's hushed murmur. Eliza toyed with her food, appetite extinguished. The bacon, overly salted, the potatoes slightly firm, forced her to swallow, driven to seem agreeable, grateful. She dared a glance at Jebediah. His brow was knit together, his jaw clenched. He consumed his meal with unwavering focus, as if each chew held paramount importance. Was he regretting his offer? Was she a disappointment? The question spiraled within her, a vortex threatening to pull her under. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. He didn't acknowledge her. "Eat," he rasped, his voice a low rumble. Eliza obeyed, pushing the potatoes around. She sensed his gaze flicker toward her, a brief, indecipherable expression flitting across his features. Then he averted his eyes, returning to his solitary repast. Minutes dripped by like water from a leaky roof. Eliza noticed a small, carved wooden bird perched on the windowsill, wings outstretched as if poised for flight. Had Jebediah crafted it? Did a hidden artistic spirit reside within this taciturn individual? She longed to inquire, to discover more, but the words remained lodged in her throat. Once finished, Jebediah cleared the table, his movements economical. He carried the dishes to a wash basin in the corner and began cleaning them. Eliza watched, feeling superfluous and unwelcome. "May I help?" she asked, her voice gaining a touch of firmness. He paused, his back still turned. "No," he replied finally without facing her. "Rest up." Eliza retreated to the small space she'd claimed. She sat on the edge of the cot, her gaze fixed on the faded patchwork quilt. Rest. How could she rest when her thoughts raced, her heart hammering with dread and apprehension? She was an alien in a foreign land, bound to a man she scarcely knew. Her future stretched before her, an uncharted expanse. She lay down, drawing the quilt around her. The aroma of wood smoke mingled with something else, a faint, unfamiliar masculinity, clinging to the fabric. She closed her eyes, attempting to silence the sounds of Jebediah moving about, the cabin's aged complaints, the relentless pounding of her own anxious thoughts. Sleep eluded her. Instead, she lay listening to the silence, feeling the weight of unspoken anxieties pressing down, threatening to suffocate her. She wondered if the remainder of her life would unfold in this manner, a silent, isolated existence overshadowed by a man who offered neither reassurance nor affection. and in the still darkness, a lone tear traced a glistening path down her cheek. A nosy neighbor. The knock possessed a shy hesitancy, a far cry from the wind's expected assault on the cabin. At the table, Jebediah, absorbed in meticulously cleaning his rifle, froze, his gaze locking onto hers with sudden intensity. A silent question hung between them before he subtly gestured for her to answer. Eliza smoothed the borrowed dress, its faded calico carrying the faint perfume of lavender and Jebediah's wood smoke, and swung the door open. A woman occupied the small porch step, clutching a pie plate draped in gingham. Her face, plump and genial, resembled a well-fed robin, and her gaze missed nothing. "Afternoon," she greeted, her voice like a cheerful trill as her eyes darted past Eliza, cataloging the cabin's interior. "I'm Mildred Higgins from down the road. Thought you might be getting settled, and a body can't thrive on just air." She offered the pie. Apple, still warm from the oven. Eliza's smile felt brittle and unfamiliar. "That's very kind, Mrs. Higgins. Please come in." Jebediah remained seated, a solid, watchful anchor in the confined space. He offered no greeting, only a curt nod as Mrs. Higgins breezed inside, her scrutiny unwavering. "Mercy," she exclaimed, setting the pie on the table with a gentle thud. "You've journeyed far, haven't you? Such a daring thing, venturing all the way out here." Her keen gaze settled on Eliza. "And Jebediah, you old fox, finally decided to put down roots, have you?" A quick wink accompanied a chuckle that lacked warmth. Jebediah merely grunted, returning to his rifle. Perched on the chair's edge, hands folded primly in her lap, Mrs. Higgins made it clear that the pleasantries were simply a prelude. "So, Eliza May, is it?" Her voice softened, tinged with what might have been genuine solicitude. Jebediah mentioned an incident. Her gaze flickered to Eliza's hands, now instinctively clasped in her lap. The scars pulsed faintly, a subtle ache echoing the growing disquiet within her. Eliza's throat constricted. "Yes, Mrs. Higgins. A fire. Dreadful things, fires," Mrs. Higgins clucked, shaking her head. "They devour everything." "Jebediah said you lost everything?" Eliza nodded, unable to meet her gaze. The questions were like tiny, stinging barbs, reopening wounds she desperately wanted to heal. She felt exposed, raw under Mrs. Higgins's pointed assessment. "And your hands?" Mrs. Higgins reached out, then hesitated, her hand hovering briefly before retracting. "They look tender." Eliza recoiled inwardly. "They're healing." She despised the tremor in her voice, which betrayed her fragile composure. "My sister makes a balm," Mrs. Higgins offered, her tone honeyed. "Miraculous for burns. I could bring some by, perhaps." "That's kind," Jebediah interjected, his voice sharp as honed steel. He rose, his imposing frame filling the already cramped cabin. "But Eliza is under exceptional care." He moved to her side, a silent, protective wall. Mrs. Higgins's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, her gaze darting back and forth between them. She seemed to sense the change in the air, the unspoken warning woven into Jebediah's words. "Well, I only wanted to welcome Eliza to Harmony Gulch," she said, her cheerfulness sounding forced. "Let her know she isn't alone." She rose to leave. "I should be heading back. Chickens won't feed themselves." She offered Eliza a strained smile. "It was lovely meeting you, dear. I'm sure we'll cross paths again." Jebediah escorted Mrs. Higgins to the door, his hand briefly touching the small of Eliza's back. The fleeting contact sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Thank you for the pie, Mrs. Higgins," he said, his voice polite yet resolute. "We appreciate it." He shut the door, the latch clicking with finality. Turning to Eliza, his expression remained an enigma. "Nosy body," he muttered, more to himself than her. He resumed cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and controlled. Eliza remained seated, her heart still a frantic drum against her ribs. The visit had stirred a tempest of emotion, apprehension, vulnerability, and a flare of anger. She loathed being pitted, being viewed as broken. She watched Jebediah meticulously clean his rifle, his brow creased in concentration. He had spoken little, but his actions resonated powerfully. He had defended her, shielding her from Mrs. Higgins's intrusive curiosity. Was it genuine protection, or merely a desire to maintain his privacy? She couldn't decipher his motivations. The silence in the cabin became a tangible weight. Eliza fiddled with a loose thread on her dress, her thoughts tumbling. She was an outsider here, a woman haunted by her past, facing an uncertain future. And Jebediah Stone, the taciturn cowboy, held the key to that future. A future she wasn't even certain she desired. Frustrations and adaptations. Mildred Higgins' pie cooled on the windowsill, its sweet fragrance a delicate foil to the cabin's musty, earthen smells. Eliza observed Jebediah as he built a woodpile near the fireplace, his motions efficient and sure. Perched on the bed's edge, she felt like a delicate ornament wholly unsuited to the task at hand. "Anything I can do to help?" she ventured, her voice thin. Jebediah paused, wiping his forehead with a swipe of his arm. "Reckon so. Supper ain't gonna make itself." A resolve hardened within Eliza. "Then let me assist." She approached the table where a burlap sack slumped with potatoes, their irregular shapes promising sustenance. Securing one in her left hand, she fumbled with the paring knife, its handle slick against her palm. She attempted to strip away the skin, but her hold wavered. The potato bucked in her grasp, the blade veering perilously close. "Confound it," she exclaimed, dropping both back onto the table with a thud. Jebediah pivoted, his gaze inscrutable. He gathered the scattered potatoes, returning them to their rough container. He offered neither comment nor empty reassurance, but instead retrieved the knife and a fresh potato. "Here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Observe." Anchoring the potato with his thumb, he drew the blade towards himself in short, precise movements, peeling the skin in a single, unbroken spiral. His practiced hand made it seem a simple task. Absorbed, Eliza watched, etching each nuance of his technique into her memory. When he finished, he passed her the peeled potato and another still bearing its earthy jacket. "Your turn," he instructed. Hesitation constricted her chest. What if she failed again, confirming her inadequacy? Yet, Jebediah's steady look held an unspoken challenge, a quiet confidence in her potential. She grasped the knife, her fingers betraying her anxiety. Mimicking his hold proved difficult, her left hand felt uncooperative. The potato slid, the knife feeling clumsy. She managed a few ragged strokes, gouging the potato more than peeling it. Frustration bloomed, a familiar bitterness threatening to engulf her. "This is pointless," she choked, her voice trembling with suppressed tears. Jebediah didn't argue, simply reclaiming the knife and potato. No criticism, no belittling of her effort. Just a solution. "All right," he conceded, reaching for a smaller knife, its blade curved like a crescent moon. "Try this." He demonstrated how to cradle the potato, using the curve to scrape rather than cut. The action depended less on grip and more on leverage. Eliza tried and surprisingly found it easier. The smaller tool felt more wieldy, the scraping motion less taxing on her rigid fingers. Progress came slowly, awkwardly, but it came. Jebediah remained a silent sentinel, offering guidance only when sought, allowing her to discover her own rhythm. Laboriously, she peeled the potato. Imperfect, certainly, but peeled nonetheless. A small smile flickered. "There," she announced, presenting her accomplishment. A hint of something akin to pride touched his features. "Good," he replied, his tone gruff yet kind. "Now, let's finish the job." They worked together, wordlessly. Eliza peeled, her confidence budding with each potato. Jebediah tended the meal, dicing vegetables and seasoning the meat. The savory scent of simmering stew diffused through the cabin, banishing the lingering miasma of fear. As she worked, Eliza stole glances at Jebediah. His brow furrowed in concentration as he stirred, his large hands moving with surprising finesse. She saw not pity but a profound patience, a wellspring of understanding. Perhaps, she mused, this new life wouldn't be entirely insurmountable. Perhaps, with Jebediah's steadfastness, she could acclimate, could carve out a home here. A nascent hope kindled within her, warming her spirit like the hearth's embrace. Storm in the barn. A jagged tear of thunder ripped through the bruised twilight, instantly snuffing out the meadowlark's cheerful chorus. Eliza, sketching the saw-toothed silhouette of distant peaks, cried out, leaping up as charcoal smeared across her drawing. The wind, moments before a playful whisper, clawed at her skirt, a sudden, sharp rebuff. She spared a glance for the house, now a distant, blocky shape swallowed by the encroaching gloom. No sign of Jebediah. Then the rain arrived, heavy droplets drumming a frantic rhythm on the parched earth, turning dust into clinging mud. Panic clawed at her throat. She had to find shelter. Before she could move, another deafening boom shuddered through the valley, punctuated by a high-pitched, desperate neigh that knifed through the building tempest. Eliza knew that cry. Belle. Something was terribly amiss. Forgetting her sketch, she bolted toward the barn, the wind and rain lashing against her like accusing fingers. The barn doors groaned open, forced inward by the gale's insistent shove. Inside, the scent of hay mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil. Jebediah knelt beside Belle, his broad back a wall against the storm, his frame tense. The mare shifted, agitated, a constant stream of worried sounds escaping her. He stroked her neck, murmuring low assurances that the rising storm swallowed whole. "Eliza," he said, his voice strained, "secure the doors." Quickly. She wrestled with the wind's fury, her muscles screaming as she hauled at the heavy wood. Finally, with a desperate surge, she slammed them shut and slid the latch home, the sudden hush inside a stark contrast to the chaos unleashed outside. Turning, she saw Belle heaving, her flanks pumping like bellows. Jebediah examined her with a touch both gentle and knowing. "She's close," he stated, his gaze locking with hers. "Any moment now." A chill, deeper than the soaking rain, ran through Eliza, not just for the mare, but for herself. Her Philadelphia life had been a tapestry of art classes and polite gatherings, a far cry from livestock and impending birth. What can I do?" she managed, her voice thin and reedy. Jebediah pointed to a stack of folded blankets. "Prepare those. And fetch warm water in that bucket." His instructions were curt, efficient, the language of experience. Eliza scrambled to obey, her hands clumsy with anxiety as she unfolded the soft wool. The barn light was dim, filtering weakly through cracks in the aged wood and a small, dusty window set high in the wall. The air hung thick with tension and the faint, metallic tang of blood. A low bellow rose from Belle, her body arching in a powerful contraction. Jebediah's hand remained steady, supporting her head. "Easy, girl," he coaxed. "Just breathe." Eliza could only watch, her heart hammering a frantic tattoo against her ribs as Jebediah worked with quiet efficiency. He was a rock, his movements sure and practiced. This was his domain, his mastery. The storm outside receded, a mere backdrop to the drama unfolding before her. Hours bled together in a torrent of rain, booming thunder, and the mare's ragged breathing. Soaked to the bone and her hands chafed raw, Eliza assisted where she could, fetching, holding, whispering encouragement to the laboring animal. A surprising sense of purpose bloomed within her, a feeling of usefulness amidst the turmoil. Then, with a final, earth-shattering push, Belle birthed her foal. A small, slick creature lay trembling on the straw, its long legs a tangle of awkward angles. Jebediah cleared its tiny nostrils, then stepped back, allowing Belle to investigate her offspring. Exhausted yet content, the mare nudged the foal, a low, rumbling purr resonating from her chest. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. It was a marvel, a testament to the enduring power of life. She met Jebediah's gaze, his face softened by the faint light. A smile played on his lips, barely perceptible, yet undeniably there. "A filly," he breathed, his voice husky with pride. "A beautiful little filly." He reached out, his calloused fingers grazing her arm, a fleeting touch that sent a tremor through her. In that instant, cocooned within the dimly lit barn, with the tempest raging outside and new life at their feet, Eliza felt a bond to Jebediah and to this severe, untamed land that she never could have envisioned. The storm still raged unchecked, yet within the barn's protective walls, a fragile serenity had taken root. Soothing the mare, Belle was trembling, her dark eyes wide and frantic. The small stable seemed to amplify the thunder, each boom sending shivers through her massive frame. Jebediah was murmuring reassurances, his large hand stroking her neck, but his efforts seemed to have little effect. The foal, still wet and unsteady on its long legs, huddled close to its mother, adding to the confined chaos. Eliza, remembering the countless hours she'd spent volunteering at the animal shelter in Philadelphia, recognized the sheer terror in the mare's eyes. Jebediah's touch was firm, practical, but Belle needed something more, something gentler. "Jebediah," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Let me try." He looked at her, skepticism etched on his face. His eyebrows, thick and dark, drew together. "You? What do you know about calming a frightened mare?" Eliza ignored the doubt in his voice and stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached out a hand, not to touch, but to offer her presence. "Just trust me," she said softly, her gaze fixed on Belle. Instead of the rough, comforting strokes Jebediah was administering, Eliza began to hum. It was an old lullaby her mother used to sing. A simple melody she hadn't thought of in years. The notes, though slightly off-key, filled the small space, a fragile counterpoint to the raging storm outside. Belle's ears twitched. She shifted her weight, her breathing still rapid but perhaps a fraction less panicked. Eliza slowly extended her hand, palm open, allowing the mare to investigate. Belle sniffed cautiously, her velvety nose brushing against Eliza's skin. "Easy, girl," Eliza murmured, her voice a soothing balm. "It's all right. The storm will pass. You're safe here." She began to stroke Belle's face, her touch light as a feather, focusing on the points between her eyes and along her jawline. She remembered reading about pressure points, about how gentle massage could release tension and ease anxiety. It was a technique she'd used on countless rescued dogs, and she hoped it would work on Belle too. Gradually, Belle began to relax. The frantic energy that had been coursing through her seemed to dissipate, replaced by a weary resignation. The tremors lessened, and she lowered her head, nuzzling Eliza's hand. The foal, sensing its mother's shift in mood, nudged closer, its small body pressing against Belle's flank. Jebediah watched Eliza's interaction with Belle, his expression unreadable. He stood silently, leaning against the stable wall, his arms crossed over his chest. The storm raged on, but inside the small space, a fragile peace had settled. The lullaby continued, a soft murmur in the darkness. Eliza's burned hands, usually a source of shame and discomfort, seemed to possess a strange power. Their gentleness, their deliberate movements, brought comfort to the frightened mare. After what felt like an eternity, the thunder began to recede, the flashes of lightning less frequent. The rain continued to fall, a steady drumming on the stable roof, but the worst of the storm had passed. Belle sighed, a long, shuddering exhale. She closed her eyes, her body finally still. The foal, exhausted from its tumultuous entry into the world, lay down beside her, its small body rising and falling with each breath. Eliza continued to stroke Belle's face, her touch unwavering. When she finally pulled her hand away, she noticed Jebediah watching her, his gaze intense and appraising. "How did you know to do that?" he asked, his voice rough with surprise. Eliza shrugged, self-conscious under his scrutiny. I used to volunteer at an animal shelter. I learned a few things." He didn't say anything for a long moment, simply studying her. Eliza could feel the weight of his gaze, the silent assessment. Finally he nodded, a barely perceptible movement of his head. "I reckon you did," he said, his voice low. There was something different in his tone, a hint of respect. Eliza couldn't be sure. He pushed himself off the wall and walked towards the stable door, his silhouette framed against the gray light of the receding storm. "I'll go check the fences," he said, without looking back. "Make sure nothing's been damaged." Eliza watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. Relief that the storm had passed, gratitude that Belle and her foal were safe, and a hesitant flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to earn Jebediah's respect. The lullaby still echoed softly in her mind, a testament to the unexpected strength she had found within herself. Delivering the foal. The hours that followed the storm blurred into a frantic dance between anxiety and action. Belle's labor progressed fitfully. Jebediah, usually so deliberate, moved with an urgency that mirrored Eliza's own. He checked Belle constantly, his weathered face etched with worry lines Eliza hadn't noticed before. "She's not progressing as she should," he muttered, more to himself than to Eliza. "Been too long." Eliza, kneeling beside Belle, felt the mare's damp coat. "What can we do?" she asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Jebediah's jaw tightened. "We might have to help her." He said the words with visible reluctance, his gaze fixed on the dirt floor as if ashamed to admit the possibility of intervention. Eliza knew what he meant. At the shelter, they'd occasionally had to assist with difficult births. It was messy, often heartbreaking, but sometimes the only way to save both mother and young. I've helped with deliveries before," she offered, her voice barely a whisper. Jebediah looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You have?" She nodded, her hands already moving, checking Belle's position. "At the shelter. Animals get into trouble sometimes." He watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a curt nod, he said, "All right. Tell me what to do." Working together, they became a strange, unlikely team. Jebediah, strong and steady, followed Eliza's instructions with surprising precision. He fetched warm water, clean cloths, and a bucket of disinfectant, his movements economical and efficient. Eliza, guided by memory and instinct, spoke to Belle in soft, soothing tones, her hands gentle but firm as she worked. Hours crawled by. The air in the barn grew thick with the smell of sweat, hay, and something primal, something undeniably alive. Eliza's arms ached and her back screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. She could feel Belle's exhaustion, her fear, and she knew they had to keep going. Finally, with a surge of effort from Belle and guided by Eliza's touch, the foal began to emerge. Eliza held her breath, willing everything to be all right. Jebediah stood beside her, his hand hovering near Belle's flank, ready to assist if needed. He didn't speak, but Eliza could feel his tension, his silent support. The foal slid into the world, a wet, trembling mass of limbs and dark, soulful eyes. Eliza gently cleared its nostrils, and a weak cough filled the air. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. "It's a filly," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jebediah knelt beside her, his gaze fixed on the foal. He reached out a calloused hand and gently stroked its wet coat. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She's beautiful," he murmured. Belle whinnied softly, nudging her newborn with her nose. The filly, still wobbly, struggled to its feet and began to nuzzle at its mother's udder. Eliza and Jebediah watched in silence, the only sounds the gentle rustling of hay and the soft suckling of the foal. The shared ordeal had forged an unspoken bond between them. Eliza looked at Jebediah, and for the first time she saw something other than stoicism in his eyes. She saw pride, relief, and perhaps even a flicker of gratitude. He met her gaze, and for a brief, fleeting moment, his expression softened. He didn't say anything, but Eliza understood. They had faced a challenge together, and they had succeeded. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the cracks in the barn walls, painting the scene in hues of gold and rose, Eliza leaned back against a bale of hay, exhausted but content. Jebediah remained beside Belle and her foal, his presence a silent promise of protection. The air was still, the only sound the gentle breathing of the mare and her foal. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sense of peace and renewal. In the quiet of the barn, Eliza felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a place for herself in this harsh land with the silent man. Perhaps even she could find happiness. Unveiling the scars. The throb in Eliza's hands had waned to a persistent ache, a muted echo of the blaze. Jebediah, taciturn since Belle's birth, expressed himself through deeds. He brought nourishment, replenished her water, and tended the hearth's insistent flame. Now he appeared, a pristine basin and folded linens in hand. "Bandages," he rasped, his voice gruff, yet devoid of its usual edge. Eliza acknowledged him with a nod, her throat constricted. This was the first time he'd offered to care for her burns personally. Previously, Mrs. Olson's capable, detached hands had managed the task. The prospect of Jebediah's touch, his witnessing the extent of the damage, sent a tremor through her. Not fear, but something akin to anticipation. She perched on the bed's edge, palms upturned, offering her hands. He set the basin on the table, the water within shimmering. Then, with measured movements, he drew up a chair, settling closer than ever before. The aroma of wood smoke and horses, uniquely his, enveloped her. His large hand closed over her left, his calloused skin a contrast against her own, his grip surprisingly tender. Wordlessly, he began to unwind the linen. Silence descended, thick and tangible, broken only by the whisper of fabric. Eliza studied his face, his brow creased in concentration, his lips a firm line. A vulnerability flickered in his usually unwavering gaze. As the final layer fell away, Eliza steeled herself. She'd avoided a thorough inspection since that first, fleeting glimpse in the mirror. Now, bathed in lamplight, the burns were brutally clear, a landscape of angry crimson and ghostly white, the skin puckered and distorted, the delicate bone structure visible beneath. Jebediah's breath caught. He remained silent, but the cerulean depths of his eyes darkened with an emotion Eliza couldn't name. Compassion? Remorse? Or something edging toward understanding? He soaked a cloth and gently bathed the injured skin, his touch featherlight as if afraid to inflict further harm. The cool water offered a fleeting balm to the raw flesh. Eliza squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back tears born not of pain, but of his unforeseen tenderness, the unexpected gentleness emanating from this man seemingly hardened by life. He continued his ministrations, slow and deliberate. Without haste, without flinching, without platitudes, he simply tended to her wounds with focused resolve. Finished, he reached for a salve, its scent redolent of herbs and earth. Deliberately, he smoothed it onto the burns, his fingers tracing the ravaged contours. A strange sensation bloomed within Eliza, a confluence of discomfort and a curious form of pleasure. It felt surreal to be touched so intimately, so delicately by a man she hardly knew, now her husband. Rebandaging her hand, his touch remained cautious, thoughtful. With quiet devotion, he mirrored the process on her right hand. As the linen unraveled, Eliza noticed his jaw clench. This hand was worse, the devastation more pronounced. She sensed his gaze lingering, his eyes brimming with a profound, unspoken sadness. He cleansed and salved with the same meticulous care. But as he secured the bandages, his fingers brushed her wrist, sending a pulse of electricity through her core. He stilled, his hand remaining on her skin. Eliza met his gaze, her heart hammering. For a suspended moment, the world receded. She saw raw vulnerability within his eyes, mirroring her own fragility. Slowly, he lifted his hand, his gaze locked on hers. He reached out, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her jaw. His touch was warm, grounding, profoundly intimate. Tears finally escaped Eliza, tracing paths down her cheeks, unchecked. They were an amalgamation of pain, relief, gratitude, and something undefinable. Jebediah lowered his head, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice raspy. Eliza shook her head, speechless. She didn't know the object of his sorrow, but it faded into insignificance. His touch, his tenderness, his presence sufficed. Drawing back slightly, his eyes searched hers. He brushed away her tears with a gentle thumb. "They're a part of you, Eliza," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They don't make you any less beautiful." Eliza stared, stunned. His outpouring was unprecedented, the words resonating deep within her. His gaze remained unwavering. He took her hand, cradling it in his. His touch spoke of promises, a silent pledge of acceptance and empathy. In that moment, a spark of hope ignited within Eliza, a fragile possibility that she might carve out a place in this unforgiving landscape and within the heart of the stoic, reserved man. A silent embrace. The salve's coolness soothed her scorched skin, a balm after days of searing heat. Jebediah's touch possessed an unexpected delicacy, his large, weathered hands moving with focused grace. He carefully unwound the bandages. The linen, clinging stubbornly to the newly forming skin, prompted a sharp intake of breath from Eliza. He halted, his gaze lifting to hers, a silent apology etched on his face. "Sorry," he rumbled, the word a gravelly whisper. With warm water and a soft cloth, he patiently coaxed the fabric free. Eliza found herself captivated. This taciturn man's unhurried attentiveness was unlike anything she had known. Martha's ministrations had been efficient, driven by duty, while this felt deeply personal. Once her hands were bare, he examined the angry welts, now muted by the ointment, his brow creased in concern. The mingled scents of lavender and chamomile hung in the air, a fragrant refuge from the harsh realities of Harmony Gulch. "They're healing," he observed, his voice a hushed murmur. "Slowly, but they are." A lump tightened Eliza's throat. She hadn't realized how desperately she craved such simple reassurance, a spoken acknowledgement of her pain. She had striven for fortitude to meet her suffering with quiet resilience, but Jebediah's unforeseen gentleness was eroding her carefully erected defenses. He rebandaged her hands with sure movements, each wrap a gentle embrace. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a tremor through her. He didn't recoil, didn't break contact. He simply continued, his focus unwavering. Finished, he finally looked up, his gaze intense and unfathomable. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding too deep for words. The carefully maintained facade then crumbled. Tears sprang to Eliza's eyes, blurring her vision. They cascaded down her cheeks, unchecked and scalding. Not since the fire, since her old life had been reduced to ash, had she wept so freely. Shame burned through her. She didn't want him to witness this collapse, this raw, untamed grief. She'd struggled so hard to be strong, to be the wife he deserved, to earn her place in this hardscrabble land. "Eliza!" His voice, a deep thrum, resonated with concern. She shook her head, unable to speak past the choking sobs. A torrent of sorrow, fear, and loneliness poured forth. Deliberately, he rose to his feet. He reached out, his calloused hands cradling her face with infinite care. His thumbs gently wiped away the relentless tears, a steadying presence in the tempest of her emotions. He offered no platitudes, no empty comfort. He simply held her, his gaze unwavering and true. The silence stretched, thick with unexpressed feelings. Eliza looked up through the watery veil, her heart hammering. A flicker of vulnerability mirrored her own pain in his dark eyes. Slowly, he lowered his head, resting his forehead against hers. His breath warmed her skin. She felt the steady cadence of his heart, a comforting anchor against the frantic rhythm of her own. Then he embraced her, pulling her close. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but rather one of profound comfort and protection, a silent pledge of unwavering support. Eliza buried her face against his chest, the coarse fabric of his shirt rough against her tear-streaked cheek. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his back, seeking solace. She felt safe, cherished, a sensation long forgotten. She wept, her tears staining his shirt. He held her fast, his arms a bulwark against the swirling tides of her despair. He remained silent, offering no solutions, no facile advice. He merely held her, allowing her grief to run its course. Within that quiet embrace, something shifted. The walls surrounding her heart began to crack, each fissure a painful testament to her past. A faint glimmer of hope ignited, a fragile spark of possibility. Perhaps, she dared to believe, she could find happiness here. Perhaps, she could even find love with this taciturn man who sheltered her in his arms. Eventually, the crying subsided, leaving her spent but strangely purged. She drew back, her gaze meeting his. Tenderness, previously unseen, softened his features. He didn't release her, his hands remaining gently on her face. He brushed a stray wisp of hair from her forehead, the caress featherlight. "Better?" he asked, his voice a low vibration. Eliza nodded, a fragile smile gracing her lips. "Better," she whispered. He lowered his hands, but remained close, near enough for her to feel the heat of his body, the reassurance of his presence. The silence returned, but it was now a comfortable quietude, filled with mutual understanding. Eliza knew their path was far from smooth. Trials undoubtedly awaited them. But in that moment, cradled in his quiet strength, a wave of hope surged through her. She was no longer alone. She had Jebediah, and perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. Harmony restored. The following Sunday required every ounce of Eliza's resolve. The past week had been a vigil of burn care, Jebediah a silent sentinel anticipating her needs without a word. The ache in her spirit, once a gaping wound, had begun to scab over, leaving a tender hope she hesitated to acknowledge. Entering the humble church, she felt a collective holding of breath. Eyes bored into her, she was sure, so she riveted her gaze to the splintered planks beneath her feet. Then, a voice, unexpectedly gentle, cut through the silence. Mrs. Henderson, notorious for her acerbic approached. "Eliza, dear, we're heartened to see you recovering so well." A wave of murmured assent washed through the room, heads inclining in solidarity. Martha, the baker's wife, offered a tentative smile, and even Silas, the blacksmith renowned for his gruffness, touched the brim of his hat. Not lavish, but undeniably acceptance. Her breath, held captive for what felt like years, finally escaped. The visiting preacher, his voice a resonating boom, delivered a sermon on redemption and second chances. Eliza absorbed every word, finding unexpected solace in its message. As the service concluded, she found herself enveloped by concerned neighbors, their faces reflecting genuine care and, perhaps, even affection. Jebediah remained at her side, a quiet guardian, his presence a steadfast anchor against the swirling emotions. That afternoon brought a hesitant knock. Little Millie stood there, her eyes wide with a blend of wonder and timidity. "Mama. Mama wondered if you might teach me to read," she stammered, clutching a worn primer. Eliza's heart soared with purpose, a chance to give back, to truly belong. "I would be honored, Millie," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Soon, Millie was joined by others, Thomas, the miller's son, Sarah, whose laughter rivaled the brilliance of the summer sun, even young Billy, usually found coated in mud and mischief. Eliza transformed the parlor into a bustling little schoolhouse, filled with the melodic cacophony of young voices grappling with phonics and the soft flutter of turning pages. Jebediah, initially reticent, became a regular fixture in the doorway, a subtle smile gracing his lips as he observed the children's progress. He even started gifting them small, exquisitely carved wooden toys, showcasing a previously unseen artistry. Seasons unfurled like vibrant tapestries, painting the valley in fiery autumnal hues before draping it in pristine winter snow. Eliza's burns faded to pale tracery, subtle reminders of the inferno she'd survived and the resilience she'd discovered. The makeshift classroom blossomed into a true schoolhouse, erected through the collective efforts of the entire community. Eliza and Jebediah's dwelling echoed with the joyful clamor of children, not only her students but their own offspring. Caleb, a son, possessed Jebediah's quiet strength and Eliza's radiant gaze, and Ruth, a daughter named for Jebediah's mother, embodied a spirit as untamed as the valley winds. One evening, as twilight painted the horizon in strokes of deepening color, Eliza sat with Jebediah on the porch. Caleb and Ruth were immersed in play, their carefree cries filling the air. Jebediah took her hand, his rough hand grasping hers. A quiet gesture, yet it spoke volumes. "You made this place a home, Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You made me a family." Eliza rested her head against his shoulder, a profound sense of contentment washing over her. The city, with its luminous allure and hollow promises, now seemed like a forgotten dream. Here, in Harmony Gulch, enveloped by familial love and communal warmth, she had discovered her true sanctuary. Studying Jebediah, she saw the map of his life etched in the lines around his eyes, each crease a testament to his unwavering honesty and integrity. The laconic cowboy had slowly, cautiously, but irrevocably opened his heart. "We made it a home, Jeb," she whispered, her voice overflowing with gratitude. "We made it together." The children raced toward them, their faces radiating pure joy. Jebediah lifted Ruth into his embrace, while Caleb tugged on Eliza's skirt. Gazing at her family bathed in the amber light of the setting sun, Eliza understood that her odyssey had been arduous, but it had guided her to this moment, to this place, to this love. And in that instant, she knew with unwavering conviction that harmony had been irrevocably restored.